QCI certification. I'll explain a little bit more about their thinking behind that after I finish. Once you have the auditor certification, in order to become a QCI, you'll have to take a new exam that they're developing. It's a written exam only, and it's 50 questions, but they're calling it a micro certification. So you'll become a certified auditor first, and then you'll take the micro certification exam for QCI. Any of you that have taken the QCI written exam know what a poorly constructed exam it is, and I think that's probably being nice. They've assured me, and I talked to people who are going to be involved in developing the new exam, that they're going to get rid of those questions that the only way you can answer them is knowing what the guy's opinion was that wrote it to begin with. So they're going to do away with all that stuff, just make a 50-question exam. For a lot of you, it shouldn't be any big deal because a lot of you already hold both certifications. So when it comes time to redo your QCI, you already have your auditor, you're good to go. The problem is going to be for those who only hold the QCI certification. They're not going to grandfather anyone in. That question was specifically asked, and Josh Olson from DOE said, no, we're not going to grandfather anyone in, because their belief is that a good QCI also knows how to do an audit. And I don't necessarily disagree with that statement. So they want all the current QCIs that aren't auditors or don't hold the auditor certification to go through that process. So any of you that hold just the QCI starting in 2019, you're going to have to get the auditor certification and then take the QCI micro exam. The problem that some of you are going to run into is, in order to sit for the auditor exam, you got to prove to BPI that you've done 15 audits. So my suggestion to those of you who only have the QCI certification, start today working on getting some audits under your belt. I know 2019 is 2 years away, and it's easy to go, oh, I got time, but it'll be here before you know it, and the last thing we want is for any of our QCIs to be going, oh, crap, I got a couple of months to recertify, and I still don't have 15 audits, nor do I know how to do an audit. So all of you QCIs that only hold the QCI certification, start working with your auditors, start working with Turner, start doing some audits, even if it's just helping your auditors with audits. Go out when you maybe don't have any inspections to do, got some time, go out with the auditors, start getting involved in the auditing process. For those of you that already hold both certifications, don't worry about it, no big deal. The other thing that they said at that meeting in Washington, and I knew this was coming, they are going to mandate from DOE that all auditors be certified through BPI. We're ahead of the curve on that, so we don't have anything to worry about there. Pretty much that's it. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, when you mean BPI wants proof that you've done audits, what is it by proof? Just some signed audit forms or what?
So you could send in a list of audits that you've done on your company letterhead with your supervisor's signature on it that says, yeah, my employee John Doe has done audits on the following 15 homes. I don't believe I've heard.
They actually watered it down even from that. It's going to be your coordinator signing off saying you've done 15 audits. It's pretty straightforward.
There you go.
They don't want client names on the application. That's the idea.
So again, just for you QCIs that don't already hold the auditor certification, don't wait till the 11th hour. Start thinking about it now, and working a little bit with Turner and your auditors to get up to speed on the audit. They don't expect you to be a full-blown, in-depth, everyday auditor, but the idea from DOE and NREL and others across the nation are that a QCI should at least have an intermediate understanding of what's going on in the audit. How else can you do a good inspection if you don't understand what happens up front? And again, I don't disagree with that. So it's not like you've got to run out and become a full-blown auditor and do audits every day for a living, but you at least need to have an understanding of what goes on in an audit and how to put some stuff into the neat audit and what makes these outcomes come out and that type of stuff. So just heads up, you got 2 years to start working on it, so don't put it off till the last minute.
I didn't really think about the training aspect of it until just now as Wade was sharing this with you. So we'll talk as a state team, and more than likely we'll put some trainings on the calendar, some auditor trainings on the calendar where specifically QCIs can come and attend, probably later in the fall or something. But we'll discuss that and figure out when's going to work best for us, and then we'll put some dates out there to see if they will work for you guys. So
absolutely.
Thanks, Wade. All right.
Yep.
One more thing on that, Matt.
Go ahead.
I guess we're still going to have to recertify our QCI stuff towards the end of this year, like as normal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If your recertification is up, and some of you are up pretty quick, continue as per normal. This new stuff won't take effect until 2019. And I'll be reaching out to those of you whose QCI is due to expire in the next 6 months, and just letting you know it's time, and I'll get with you and schedule time to come up and do that.
Okay, sweet.
Perfect. Oh, by the way, I hit record about halfway through what Wade was saying, so I am recording the meeting like I always do. All right, next item is just the BPI. So we've mentioned numerous times that you can self-report and get credit for this type of training. I have no idea if anybody has done that. I made a phone call yesterday and just to BPI and just verified some of my assumptions. My first assumption was that it would be too difficult for me to get BPI's approval before this meeting for you guys to just have BPI credit for attending this meeting. And that assumption was correct because we like to plan this meeting a week or two before we have it. And the reason why we like to do that is it allows us to train on things that are more timely. BPI would not have enough time to review this and allow me to send them a list of people that attended and give you guys credit that way. But BPI has a really easy way to allow you to get credit, and I wanted to show you what that looks like really quickly. So all you have to do is you guys go and self-report. And I got a slide here. So after this meeting today, if you wanted to, you can self-report this, and you can get 1 BPI CEU credit for attending this webinar. All you do is you log into your candidate account by going to bpi.org, clicking on Login and Candidate Account. Once your candidate account opens up, over on the left-hand side, you'll see this toolbar, and it'll have your name and address and a bunch of stuff on the screen. But if you just click on the CEU portal, then you have to click through a few things. It'll open up your portal, and again on the left, your portal, there's an option to add continuing education credits. And then once you click on that, then you hit another button that says Add CEUs. And once you've done all that, it's going to take you to a form that looks just like this. So for today's training, all you would do on that form is you would type in the title of today's training, the training company, and I put Utah WAP. Wade, would it be better to put IWTC, or does it matter? Maybe he won't weigh in. No worries. But whatever I put on a certificate, which I'll talk about in a second, then that's probably what you put here. And then just today's date, which should actually be the 4th, I think, not the 3rd. I was doing this yesterday. So you put the date of the training. And then for all of these trainings, they're webinars. So you just select a webinar. And then once you've done that, you hit continue. And it logged me out. I apologize because I've timed out. But the very next thing, all it does is it goes right back to that screen and shows it shows all the same fields, but it has one extra field where you have to upload a document. Wade says he can't hear me. Can others hear me?
I can hear you now, man. You cut out for quite a while there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I cut out for others as well?
Yep.
Uh-oh. I'd probably have a network issue. Let me plug in my hard wire so I don't cut out again. So let me just, to repeat a few things that I just said while I'm plugging my wire in. You can self-report through the BPI portal. All you have to do is log in to your candidate portal and click through to where it says, you know, CEU portal, add continuing eds, and then add CEUs. And then it'll go to a form. All you got to do is fill out the form. And you have to, every time you fill out a form, you have to upload a document. You have to upload proof of your attendance. And if you've done that, then you automatically get credit. So BPI has actually set it up to where you get the credit automatically, and then they will audit stuff from time to time and verify it. So Dalton told me he had done this when we went to a lead training class. So I jumped on a couple of days ago, and sure enough, all I had to do was fill out a form. I uploaded a copy of my certificate of, you know, attendance, or the thing that says that I passed the course, and the system automatically showed that I had a bunch of credits for attending that course. So for these webinars, you get it's a 1-to-1 ratio for a live webinar. So if we have an hour-long webinar, you guys get one CEU, or one BPI CEU credit for attending this. And then I think for each certification, you can have up to 10 of these. So, you know, we're going to hold 12 a year usually. So that is an opportunity, if you guys will attend, to get the credits that you need, or get some of the credits that you need for the BPI stuff. Now, though, there's one caveat with all of this. You have to attend the live webinar. They will not give you credit if you watch the recording later. I don't know why, but that's the way they set up their rules, and that was part of their accreditation, so that's what it is. So you have to attend the live session, and then the other thing is you need some proof that you attended, and the way they wrote it is I actually have to, you have to log in individually when you sign into this. Now I think that's a little problematic, and I talked to them about that, because I know there's a couple of, well, there's one office in particular where they don't have a lot of internet, and so if everybody in the office were to try and sign in, that would crash their internet. And I know there's a couple of other offices where there's a groups of people who will get together around one computer. So I did get confirmation from BPI that if you're doing that, if you're in an office where there's 5 or 6 of you sitting around a computer watching this, all you have to do is one of you is going to have to take roll and send it to me. The roll needs to have today's date, the name of the meeting, everybody that attended, and I do need email addresses for everybody. And then what I will do after this meeting is everybody who's logged in, and I can see your name logged in, I will send you a certificate of attendance, and then you can self-report. And if I get any lists of attendees from people who, you know, there was multiple people, then I'll send you that same email, and you guys can self-report. Any questions on all that? All right, I'm hearing none. If you have any questions or need any help with it at all, let me know. And if any of you are looking back and saying, hey, can I get credit for a few others, if you'll send me a list of the ones you want to get credit for, I can look back and see if you logged in and see if I can give you a certificate of attendance for that. So I had a couple other quick things before we get to the main topic. Duct operating pressures. So I had a conversation with a guy named Mark Turns. Mark is, he works for Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Oak Ridge is the company that wrote the NEAT audit. So auditors, specifically listen up for just a second here. I have been having you do one thing wrong, and as I talked with Mark, it took a little while and we figured it out. But what it was is that as we were looking at another issue, he had questions about why my duct operating pressures were so high. And then I talked to him again at the National Housing Conference that I went to a couple of weeks ago. And then after that, he had attended a class while he was there and got thinking about us even more. And then he sent me an email and said, hey, I figured out what the problem is. So what I've asked the auditors, what I've trained the auditors to do is that you're using the numbers that you, your duct pressures for your total external static pressure, which is after the filter but before the blower for your return side of things, and then on top of the heat exchanger but before the A coil. And those are going to be higher than what they're supposed to be for the audit because they are they haven't taken out the drop in pressure for the filter and for the A coil. So for the audit, now this is not for when you're determining whether or not the equipment is running within its appropriate range, but for the audit, where this says duct operating pressures and you put your supply and your return, you need to take your return pressure before the filter and you need to take your supply pressure after the A coil. So as an auditor, that means you're probably going to be drilling 4 holes in this system so that you can take your total external static pressure and also your return and supply pressures. And anyway, those the return and supply pressures, you'll end up getting much smaller numbers than you're used to seeing for your total external static pressure. That is the way the audit was designed, was to use these smaller pressures. Some of you who've used the bigger numbers, you'll end up getting a payback for duct sealing of like $5,000. And using the smaller numbers will cut that down. It's still, I think it's still a little high, but it's much more reasonable. So if anybody has any questions on that, or the next time you do that, if you want a little bit of help, feel free to call me and I'll I can walk you through it again. So
I just want to jump in here. We need to make sure that we don't get confused out there, because if you measure static pressure at those 2 new points Turner pointed out, and you're doing that to evaluate for an ECM motor, you're going to end up getting yourself in trouble. The total static pressure, true static pressure reading on any system is always before the coil and after the filter.
Yeah, so here and here. And I'm sure we will train on this more. I know I'm covering this quickly today, but so if you're not completely understanding it, call me the next time you do an audit and I'll walk you through it. But yeah, exactly what Wade said. You get, this is your total external static pressure here and here, and then this is where you're going to measure just for the audit, the supply and return pressures. The supply pressure, the engineer, Mark Turns, the engineer, who he's actually a little uncomfortable with us just taking a pressure here. He actually wanted us to take a pressure down at the end of the duct and then here and average it and do a bunch of stuff. But then he admitted it's not going to mess up the numbers too much. I think it's unnecessary, so we're not going to do that. But when you really understand the science of what we're doing here, he is correct. This is where we need to take the measurement for the audit. So they designed the audit properly. I just never put the pieces together that that's where we were supposed to be taking the measurements. So, all right. So that's the duct operating pressures. The next thing was at that home performance conference that I went to, Ana Maria Garcia, she's the director of the weatherization program at the federal level. She gave a speech, and in that speech, she committed to putting the NEAT audit online. So of course I had to ask Mark Turns, because he was they were the company that got the contract last time. I just said, what's going on with that? He said they're in discussion with DOE right now. Obviously, they're probably going to be the best choice to do that. They already started it back in 2011. But he said they're in discussions about it, and he anticipates at least a year. So FYI, they're still working on it. And that's as much as I know. But I was curious, so I wanted to pass it along in case any of you are curious. So, and then the last thing here is that Brad, he actually sent out an email like a week or so ago. He has submitted our grant for any of you who like to keep up on that. And then as of this morning, he got feedback from our project officer that it's past our project officer's desk. So, so basically, our grant was turned in early, and it has passed our project officer's desk, probably one of the first states to pass his desk. So if DOE finishes everything on time, it's more likely we'll get funded on time. So, all right, any questions on new business stuff before we move into our main topic for the day? Okay, I'm going to get into the main topic, which is our basement strategies. Now, for those of you who logged in before I started speaking, I had a little picture up, and we will get to that picture because I know that that's a problem that many of you face. But so we wanted to just take some time today and talk about basement and crawl space strategies. The interesting thing about these strategies, is that there's lots of variables that we have to account for, and I really wish we could just write one rule and we could just follow that one rule every time. But this is the area where the auditors particularly are required to think and use their brain, and the auditors have to make a decision, and then we have to run with that decision. So to start this off, I wanted to basically review, I think, what is probably the most helpful resource when it comes to these basement strategies, and it's in your field guide. I've ran across the table a couple of years ago after we bought our field guide, and I realized how important it is. I've shared it with many of you because it really is pretty straightforward, easy thing to read through and help you to, if you have questions about how to deal with a basement, I feel like this thing is a great resource to help you kind of answer those questions. But ultimately, for everybody who's on the line, the auditor is responsible to go out and make this determination. So the analogy of the auditor being the quarterback works really well here. The auditor has to call this play based on what they see on site, and then they're going to pass the ball, and you guys need to run with it. Now, auditors are fallible. We make mistakes. So if you guys who are in the field and you're seeing stuff on QCIs, if you're seeing stuff and you're wondering, why did we make this particular decision, you guys are professionals. Talk to your auditors, and you might learn something from your auditor might learn something from you, but I think we can have a really good relationship as we work together. I think it's very valuable for everybody to understand, what the auditor has to consider and why they're making the decisions they make. So anyway, in the field guide in Chapter 6, there are these two tables. This is Table 6-1. And it talks about crawl spaces, and it says, where is the thermal boundary? And then Table 6-2 says, unoccupied basement, where's the thermal boundary? And so just quickly, I'm going to go through Table 1, and then we'll jump into Table 2, but it's kind of the same stuff. But Table 1, on the left-hand side, it says, here's a list of factors that would favor establishing your thermal boundary at the foundation wall. So here's a picture of us establishing our thermal boundary in a crawl space at the foundation wall. And then over on the right, it just has a list of factors that would favor establishing the thermal boundary at the floor. And this is not a checklist. You don't have to have every single one of these. It's just as you're thinking about how to deal with this house, here's a list of things to think about. So for factors favoring foundation wall insulation, the first one says that the ground moisture barrier, there's ground moisture barrier and a good perimeter drainage present or planned. And I think it's important to remember or to kind of keep in mind the planned part of this. Sometimes you may go through this list and realize that you're going to address some of these things as part of weatherization. And so even though they don't currently exist, you know you're going to put in a good vapor barrier. So that's why, you know, that might help you to decide to go this direction or that direction. But so yeah, so you got good ground moisture barrier in place. The next one is that your foundation walls test tighter than the floor. And by test tighter, it means that your foundation walls are a better air barrier than the floor is. One quick way to test that is to just do a zonal from inside the house to the crawl space. So you're going to reference the crawl space with reference to the house. So if I had my manometer in this room and I had a blower door going, the blower door is going to be at a negative 50, but my manometer inside this room is going to say 0. So if I do a zonal into the crawl space, if that crawl space is completely connected with the upstairs, then the number is going to be pretty close to 0, right? So if the number is close to 0, that means that it's really connected to upstairs, or the floor is not a very good air barrier. Or the assumption here is that the foundation walls and the sill assembly are a better air barrier than the floor. So if that number is below 25, it's just an indication. It's not proof positive. It's just an indication that this is a better air barrier than this. And then the same goes over on the flip side. If the number is above 25, it means that your foundation walls are actually more leaky than your floor would be. And so, you know, it's an indication. The auditors then go down and confirm that oh yes, the floor is actually made of a material that makes a good air barrier, and we wouldn't have to do a lot of air sealing to make this a nice air barrier. So again, the foundation walls test tighter than the floor. That's one indication that it would be better to insulate down the foundation walls. The vents can be closed off. We don't want to insulate down the foundation walls and then leave crawl space vents open. It would kind of defeat the purpose. So you need to verify that we can close the vents off. We're going to seal them and insulate them in a durable manner. Furnace ducts and water pipes are located in the crawl space. So if you have a bunch, especially if you have a bunch of uninsulated ductwork that's down there, a lot of times it's probably easier to insulate down the wall than it would be to insulate the floor and insulate all of the ductwork. It's also probably more cost effective. Now, I did leave, as a little caveat here, I did leave in the guidelines, if you ever run into a situation where you feel strongly that you should insulate down the wall and you should also insulate your duct that's down in that space, the guidelines will allow for that. You're welcome to do that. If you have duct down there, you are always required to air seal it, because we want to deliver the air up into the intentionally conditioned space. But if your thermal boundary goes down to here and your ductwork is inside that thermal boundary, you're not required to insulate it, but you are required to air seal it if it's outside of the conditioned space. So kind of keep those things in mind as you're looking at that. And then another factor is just you got concrete or concrete block walls that would be easy to insulate. If you get down here and these walls would not be easy to insulate, then you might start leaning the other direction. Floor air sealing and insulation would be more difficult than insulating and sealing the foundation. So you look up and there's a whole bunch of crud hanging in the way. It might be a little easier to get to this. And then the other one is that the foundation wall or parts of the foundation wall are already insulated. So anyway, I feel like it's a really good list. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing groundbreaking there. I think most of you know all of these things, but from time to time, if you ever get in a house and you're confused, open up the field guide and just read through this list. It'll quickly clarify in a lot of situations which direction you should go. For the factors that favor the floor, you might have a damp crawl space with no improvement offered by weatherization. Floor air sealing and insulation are reasonable options considering any obstacles that you might have. The floor tests tighter than the foundation walls. There's no furnace or no ductwork down there. Building code or code officials forbid closing your vents, so if you cannot close off your vents, you have to leave them open, then you need to insulate the floor. If you have a rubble masonry foundation wall and you know you're not going to be able to, if you don't have a good method to attach the stuff to that, or the floor is already insulated. So anyway, that's a great reference. I realize I feel like most of the time we lean towards sealing off the vents, and a lot of times it's easier to run your insulation down the foundation wall. But there are going to be instances where it's going to be better to do this. I'm thinking of, there was a crawl space that I got into down in Cedar City, and we saw a bunch of efflorescence on the walls, just an indication that there had been some standing water in there, and that there's a lot of groundwater. And we couldn't quite put our finger on it. And I left, and the auditor called me back a little while later. Actually, one of the field guys called me back and said, oh, we figured out why there's groundwater. There's a settling pond next door over the fence. And so in that case, we wanted to leave the vents open so that the moisture could get out, because we really couldn't deal with the bulk moisture as part of weatherization. So that's crawl spaces. It's a very similar list for basements, but basements, like, don't be afraid to go down into a basement and go, oh, there's a concrete floor, but I really think I should insulate the floor. Now again, for the most part, most of the time we want to keep that space inside the thermal envelope, but every once in a while you're going to have some weird something going on, and it's okay to insulate at the floor if you have all those factors that favor the floor. So again, factors that would favor a foundation wall in a basement: ground drainage and no existing moisture problems. There's an interior stairway between the house and the basement. Ducts and furnace are in the basement. Foundation walls test tighter than the floor. The basement may be occupied someday. That's okay to, you know that that's a possibility. A laundry in a basement, floor air sealing and insulation would be difficult, and a concrete floor. Factors that would favor the floor would be a damp basement with no solution during weatherization. So you're seeing that water seeping through the foundation. Floor air sealing and insulation is a reasonable option considering the obstacles. There's no furnace or ducts present. The floors test tighter than the foundation walls. There's an exterior entrance, and there's not a stairway coming from inside the house down. There's a rubble masonry foundation walls. There's a dirt floor or deteriorating concrete, and there's badly cracked foundation walls. So these are all indicators that you might want to think about the floor. Now I went into a home one day, and they had a combination of each of these. But when I got into the home, they had already addressed the moisture issue. So there was a great big basement under this home. 2/3 of the basement had a concrete floor. 1/3 was still exposed dirt. They had a laundry down there. They stored a bunch of stuff, and they had a bedroom established down there. And there were stairs coming from upstairs, downstairs, and but there was still some confusion about whether or not to insulate at the floor or insulate at the walls, and because there were some factors from both of these lists. And if you ever run into that, start putting a check mark next to stuff and see which one has more check marks. Like in that case, that would have solved the problem, and I feel like it would have helped them make the right decision, because we had a few more check marks in the factors that favored the foundation wall versus the floor. So anyway, this probably is the best tool that I could point you guys to when you're trying to figure out what to do with your basements. Now these are very straightforward basements. They're pretty simple that we've been talking about so far. So what do we do when we have that split level house, or we just have a house where there's some crawl space and some basement, and we don't know if basement might be conditioned, it might not. So I don't feel like our field guide, it has some good stuff in there. Actually, I have not verified how well the field guide addresses this. So on this subject, I went straight to the SWS. Now the SWS is the standard workforce specifications that that DOE put out and that we have to follow. Our field guide is supposed to align with all of that. It's supposed to have all this in there. But for this slide, I just grabbed it right out of the SWS. If any of you guys need help with the SWS, you want to know more about how to use it, give me a call. I'll walk you through it anytime. But I just took some screenshots right out of the DOE's rules and then kind of drew a picture here so we can talk about a couple of situations. So this first situation is a conditioned basement with a vented crawl space. So we have a conditioned basement and we have a crawl space that's going to be vented. We probably don't run into this too much, but every once in a while you will. So DOE says the crawl space will be separated from the conditioned basement with a continuous air barrier, ground moisture barrier, and a thermal boundary. So this conditioned space has to be separated from this space with three things. We have to have a ground moisture barrier in the crawl. We have to have an air barrier that separates the conditioned basement from the crawl. And we have to have a thermal boundary. So our thermal boundary is going to have to come up, at least come up this wall. And then since it's a vented crawl, we're going to have insulated the floor. So in this situation, most of the time, your thermal boundary is going to be established here. And then some of the things to think about with that continuous air barrier is you got to make sure if there's an access from that conditioned basement into the vented crawl, that access needs to be nice and airtight. So if you have ductwork that goes from the conditioned basement into the crawl, you need to make sure that you can seal around that ductwork. If you have a B-vent that runs through that wall, you got to pan around that and make sure that you have a good air barrier there. But the whole goal is to keep that outside air from coming into the basement through that hole in the wall. On the closed crawl, so we have a conditioned basement and a closed crawl. You'll notice the verbiage from DOE is exactly the same except for they left off the last three words. So in this case, the crawl space will be separated from the conditioned basement with a continuous air barrier and the ground moisture barrier. So we want to make sure we have a good air barrier here to separate the two spaces, but you can establish your thermal boundary all the way down to the ground in the crawl space. You don't necessarily have to do it at the floor. So anyway, so that's your conditioned basement connected to a crawl space. A couple of other scenarios would be an unconditioned basement connected to a crawl space. And in this case, DOE says if you have a vented crawl, so unconditioned basement with a vented crawl, the vented crawl space will be separated from the unconditioned basement with a continuous air barrier because, again, we're going to have outside air coming through that vented crawl, and we don't really want to have that air moving through the unconditioned basement if we don't need to, because the basement, it's a vented crawl because of moisture issues. The basement probably doesn't have moisture issues. We got some cement floor and stuff. So that's the main thing is we just want to separate them with a continuous air barrier, and we're going to have our ground moisture barrier there. And then what we probably see more often is our unconditioned basements with a closed crawl space or a crawl space where we can close off the vents. And in that case, it says that the unconditioned basement will be treated as an extension to the closed crawl space, or I don't know if they needed to put the word will in there, but that they can be treated as a condition or an extension. And basically what that means is that if you have a closed crawl space and you've got a good solid moisture barrier there, and you brought your thermal barrier down to here, do you need to make sure that this is airtight if this is an unconditioned basement? You don't really have to make sure it's airtight. I think it's a good practice to still have a door there, but it doesn't. You don't have to be air sealing off this wall because you're now air sealing essentially a wall that's inside of our thermal boundary, and our air barrier really needs to be out here at the thermal boundary. So I've got the two scenarios. Either the thermal boundary comes down to the floor here, or down the foundation walls, or you can also have the situation where you would insulate the floor. And again, it's okay to have a bypass between your closed crawl and your unconditioned basement. It's okay to, most of the time. If you get in there and there's a concern of critters in the crawl, it's okay also to put a nice door on there and close it off. So I hope that those scenarios will cover most of what you will find in general, but now we come to this slide. And as Scott Bolander incriminated himself at the beginning and said, you like our pictures. So Scott, tell me about this picture. What do you guys run into there?
Well, all the checks would have been in the category of insulating the basement walls because there was laundry down there.
Okay.
There was a furnace down there. There was a finished room down there. So you really should have put the basement in the thermal envelope. But as you can see, it's kind of difficult to insulate those basement walls because there's a little old lady that lived there and she wasn't about to move all that stuff. Yeah. So do we move that stuff or do we just go the other route and try to make it the other, insulate the floor instead? Was the question.
Well, I asked Scott that question because I could see in the upper corner of this picture there may be some floor insulation there, and so as he threw this question to me and kind of said, "What do we do?" And I said, "Well, could you insulate the floor, and then insulate one of the interior walls?" So what do we do in this situation? Like, do we want our guys moving fruit jars that could fall and break and make a big mess? And what do you guys think?
Kind of a liability.
I heard a no and a liability, and that is the direction I lean on this. Like, I have heard from time to time of people going above and beyond in some situations because the liability was low, but no, you're not expected to move this stuff at all.
It doesn't be worth it to do the floor. How are you going to get around in there without tripping over stuff?
Yeah, and that's another question is, so maybe they could have done an interior wall, but it's very likely that, exactly as Tony just mentioned, over on that interior wall, you're also going to have the issue of tripping around stuff. Right.
Well, plus the old lady's going to have to do her laundry in the cold.
Yeah. Yeah. This one's not an easy answer. I wanted to give you guys a couple of things to consider as you deal with this, but I don't have a perfect answer for this one.
Prefer it like we prefer a crawl space that's 20 inches deep.
We have one, Matt. It's don't create a problem we don't need to, so we wouldn't do anything and we would note it on the audit.
That sounds very wise. That is a really good way to address it. I drew just to show if anybody's not seeing that instead of establishing the thermal boundary all the way out here, look at it and see, hey, if the floor is already insulated above, could we establish our thermal boundary here and here? But again, if you got the same amount of junk here and here as you do here and here, then that probably doesn't solve your problem. The other issue you'd have to deal with here is that these interior walls are probably not a good air barrier because you also have to deal with the floor that could be open. But before you do all of that, do some zonals on that and kind of assess whether or not you have a decent air barrier or that you could establish one, you know, within a reasonable amount of money and time. I'll come back to that one. So here's two things to think about when you're dealing with it. So the first one is, in general, we should be picking the thermal strategy which will allow us to the greatest amount of completion of the thermal boundary. Like, you're going to have situations where you're not going to be able to complete the thermal boundary. There's going to be a couple walls in a basement where everything else in the basement is already insulated, and you audit that one wall, and that one wall does not pay back. If you audited a wall and you can show on the audit that it didn't pay back, don't lose a second of sleep over it, because you know you have documentation as to why you didn't insulate that wall. Now, in this situation where it's a mess, and that's why you're not going to insulate something, then you need to document that. Just take some photos, and then you need to describe what you did to try and address it. You know, you don't want to just make assumptions in their basement. You do need to talk to the homeowner. You need to find out if they have any resources, any family, or, you know, neighbors or something that they could call upon to help them to move that stuff out of the way. And you need to explain why it would be valuable to them to move the stuff out of the way. But if they don't move the stuff out of the way, weatherize their house and go home. The problem with that is this next part, though. So there's a fine line between no opportunity for improvement and having an issue with cherry picking. So in that scenario, if you talk to the little old lady and she says, "Oh yeah, my grandson, he'll come and take care of this for me," and then you show up to the day to weatherize it and grandson never took care of it, you need to make sure and document what happened so that this doesn't look like cherry picking. So if the guys will make sure and document on the field notes or on the work order that the grandson never did whatever he was supposed to do, and so that measure could not be completed, that should be sufficient. You want to kind of think about it, make sure that it doesn't look like the homeowner was trying to avoid a measure that they didn't want. But so DOE has never expressly written anything like this, but there's hints of it in their guidance. And unfortunately, I really wish they would just come right out and write something like this down, but they won't. But Tony just mentioned a height limitation on a crawl space. So a while ago, we sent a letter to DOE and we said, "Hey, is it okay for us to not go into these crawl spaces when we have height limitations?" And DOE's response was, "Why are you asking this question? If there's a height limitation, there's no opportunity to weatherize in there. So why are you asking this question?" And it was like, well, it's because we needed you to write something down for us. But that was their answer, is that because of that height limitation, there was no opportunity to go in and put a vapor barrier. There was no opportunity to insulate that crawl space floor because there's not enough room to work in there. You could run into the same situation in a basement. You're going to have no opportunity for improvement in a basement. When you do, make sure, if you can identify that as an auditor, that will be the cleanest approach. If the auditor can determine, look, there's no opportunity here, the homeowner does not have any resources to address it, so I am not going to evaluate that part of the basement, and I'm going to document that on the audit. But if the auditor has audited that, and as part of the work order, you were supposed to go in and insulate that, but when you get there, the day you're supposed to weatherize it, and there is still no opportunity for improvement, now the guy in the field needs to document that. He needs to take a photo, and he needs to write on the work order so that we can show it wasn't a cherry picking issue. Is that reasonable? Go ahead.
So also, talking with you before, you also want the audit to show the house after weatherization. So would we need to go back in and change the audit to show no wall insulation there? Or do we need to reevaluate for now a floor insulation and the 2 interior walls?
Perfect question, and the answer is no. If you show up and the homeowner hasn't made good on their end of things, do not rerun the audit because it'll reshuffle the deck and you'll end up having to go back and do other measures. So, but bear that in mind when, especially as auditors, when you're there educating the client about what you might be doing in their home, you know, bear all that in mind. If you can tell from that conversation that they're not going to address the stuff in the basement, then, you know, don't put it on the audit. I realize that's a hard one to, you know, if you can tell, how can you tell? But, you know, if you got a sneaky feeling that it's just not going to happen, then, you know, use your judgment. But yeah, if the homeowner didn't do what they were supposed to do, don't rerun the audit because it's going to mess stuff up. Just
if there's any measures that are affected by that certain whatever thing we're supposed to do, do we not do those as well and let the client know, like, hey, since we can't do this, we can't do these?
That's a great question, and it really kind of starts to fall under that cherry picking thing. So, and for Josh, and go ahead, Tony.
Matt, hey, so it's just like blowing walls in though. I mean, walls typically come up first and then windows and all that stuff underneath it. And if we can't do the walls, they don't get everything underneath that.
Exactly.
So
exactly. And that's why I wrote there's a fine line between there not being an opportunity for improvement and this being cherry picking. And unfortunately, you guys are going to have to use your judgment. If you will document what your judgment was, I'll back you up every time on it. Like, and I think that's the message there, is that because some situations you're going to walk into and you're going to be like, no, the homeowner's not doing this because they don't want us to blow in their walls. And
well,
if
what
that's
if
the
you don't
case,
agree with my judgment call?
what's that?
What if you don't agree with my judgment call?
If you documented what your judgment call was, I will back you up on it every time.
All right, this is recorded now.
It is. It's on video. I'm going to put it on YouTube. You can fast forward to this in the future and tell me that I have to do what I said I was going to do. But that's the reason why I say that is a reasonable person should have that same approach. Like if we had some federal auditor come in and look at this, if you documented, look, this was a little old lady and, you know, she indicated when we were there that she'd be able to do this, but it was clear that she didn't have the resources and therefore we just didn't do that one measure. Whereas in another situation, the homeowner had indicated he was really concerned about us blowing in his walls. When we showed up, he hadn't bothered to move anything away from his walls. So we identified this as a potential cherry picking and we stopped doing work. Right, you know, we did everything right up to the insulate the walls and we finished our weatherization and went home. The whole idea behind the cherry picking is, I think, and I honestly don't have any experience with this, but the hope is that you can talk to the homeowner and say, well, I can't do anything below this if you don't move this stuff.
Matt.
Yeah.
How do you submit that to DOE if you've got that measure on there and you didn't do it, even with written? Even if you write something down,
that is the dilemma.
On your audit now.
That is the dilemma. And if you take it off the audit, what happens?
It can reshuffle the deck and it could take windows and do other things away, but
yeah.
So what do you do? I mean, I think you got to rerun it.
Yeah, if you rerun it, it reshuffles stuff, and we're in progress now. We already, the quarterback already threw the ball. We're in play. So if you, I'm not going to fault you if you ever reran something, but I worry that you'll open up a can of worms you don't want to open up. All you got to do is document on the work order what you did. And that way when the QCI goes there, he can look at the audit and he go, oh, why didn't we install this measure? He can look at the work order and he can see, oh, this is what happened. We couldn't install this measure. And based on what they wrote here, the QCI can say, yeah, I agree. I really don't see this as cherry picking. I see this as something we just couldn't have avoided. We probably, the homeowner didn't do what they were supposed to do. Now, if you have in most situations, I guess err on the side of cherry picking if you can, because most of the time you can talk to that client and you can say, hey, we talked about having this stuff moving. It's not ready. Do we need to come back on another day? Because if we don't, then I can't actually do the rest of this list. And if you feel like you have a homeowner that really could have moved the stuff, then hold their feet to the fire a little bit and tell them, we have this rule called cherry picking, and I can't do the rest of the list until you move that stuff. So, and again, if they said, well, I'm not going to move the stuff, so just do what you can and leave, then that's exactly what we would do, and we would make a note of that on the work order, and we'd hand that to DOE, and we'd say we stopped here because we didn't want to break the cherry picking rule. So, in the same vein, I feel very confident that we can write down that, this one situation had unique circumstances and there was really no opportunity to do that one measure. And so we wrote a note about it on the work order, we finished the job, and we went home. You guys okay with that? Are you still concerned about it? All right, and that's hopefully that is clear enough to give you guys at least a little more confidence when you run into it. But again, call me if you're really concerned about it, or if you just want a refresher on what needs to be done. So let me do one more slide, and then that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to talk about today. Then I'll see if anybody has any questions. So the other thing to think about is how does your basement strategy impact your other weatherization? So question for you guys, how would your basement strategy impact your ASHRAE strategy?
It would not be included as part of your square footage and volume of the house.
Perfect. Yeah, you'd want to account, whether you're, depending on whether you're bringing stuff in or outside the envelope, you'd want to account for that. What else? What if you had a crawl space that there was height limitations and you couldn't put a moisture barrier in there?
And you can't do exhaust only.
Yeah, you got to do neutral or positive pressure ASHRAE, right? So, perfect. Any other things that would impact your ASHRAE? I think those were the two big ones that I was thinking of. What about your heating and cooling loads? How does your strategy impact those? Just
Kind of obvious.
Yeah, just determine, depending on where you establish that thermal boundary, exactly what Ian was saying, it's going to change the size of your heated space. Duct insulation and duct sealing, I threw those on there just to talk about. I already covered what I was concerned about there. If you have duct work that is outside of the conditioned space, intentionally conditioned space, that ductwork should be air sealed. And if that ductwork is outside of the envelope, outside of the thermal envelope, or the thermal boundary, then it should be insulated. That sometimes you may just be doing some duct sealing and not necessarily insulating it. Everybody okay with that, or questions on that? Yeah.
I thought in conditioned space on ductwork, we just need to seal the return and we don't have to do the supply.
Yeah, if the ductwork is inside of your conditioned space, then I don't really care. I should stop using that term. Then you do not have to do duct sealing on the stuff inside the conditioned space. But if it's outside the conditioned space, it's
right.
So if we had if we had ductwork down in this crawl space, the ductwork would be outside of your intentionally conditioned space, but it's inside the thermal boundary. So that ductwork should be air sealed, but it doesn't have to be insulated. Anyway, just all of those things end up being factors in your strategy for your basement. So that's the end of my slides for this. You guys have any questions or anything else you've been wondering about when it comes to conditioned basements? Or sorry, to not conditioned basements, but to basement strategies or crawl space strategies? I'm hearing nothing. If you have any others you want to, that come to you later in the day, shoot me a text or give me a call. Again, if you want BPI credit for this and you did not log in with your name on this, then make sure and either get on the list with the group of people you're sitting there with or send me an email and I'll give you what you need so you can self-report. If nothing else, our next meeting will probably be the first Tuesday in May, which is the 2nd. And if, as always, if any of you have any suggestions or ideas for these meetings, let me know. And thank you for your attendance and participation. You guys have a good day.
Take care. Thank you.